Today, we're gonna go over how to pick a great campsite. So I'm here in the National Forest, gonna be doing some dispersed camping. And believe it or not, there are a lot of things that I am considering when I'm choosing where I wanna actually pitch my tent. So I'm gonna go over all those things today and show you some good examples and some bad examples. Now, if you're camping at a campground, maybe you've made a reservation somewhere, there are typically designated areas and campsites where you're pitching your tent. It's still a good idea to think through these things. But when you're dispersed camping or even, backpacking and you're in the backcountry, it's not as obvious where to pitch your tent. And so these tips and these things to think about are going to be really important. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about when I say dispersed camping versus campgrounds, definitely check this video out here. It goes into the differences and the pros and cons of each. So my first tip or thing to think about is you're going to want to use a site that has been previously used. So I'm here in the National Forest and I pulled up to this spot and I can see very clearly there are at least 4 spots that I can tell someone has pitched their tent. The ground is maybe a little bit matted down and there are a ton of rock ring fire pits. So one there, one I think over there, and I think one way back there. So there are a lot of places where it's pretty clear that other people have camped. And that's kind of where I want to start my search instead of making new spots, because there are just plenty of already made spots. One thing that I like to do actually at home is look at satellite maps on my computer. And a lot of times you can see areas that you could potentially camp. So in the satellite view, you can kind of tell that someone has camped there. This area is maybe matted down. So use that to your advantage and help you kind of plan and figure out where you might want to try to find some of these campsites. And then in addition to that, I have the Gaia GPS app on my phone and I download maps for offline use for the areas that I'm going camping. So this allows me to, again, look at the satellite view on the go to help me adjust and find spots as needed. So that's just like a little tip and something that I like to think about before at home as I'm planning my camping trips. All right, so we got our rock ring fire pit. We have clear spots where someone else has probably pitched a tent right here. So the next thing I'm going to be looking at is for flat and firm ground. This seems fairly obvious, but if you've ever pitched your tent on a slight slope, it might not look like a big deal, but when you're actually laying there at night, it is super annoying. I have done this, and then at night I'm just sliding off my sleeping bag slowly throughout the night, and I gotta pull myself back up. So I really want to look for ground that is flat, and I don't want to be pitching my tent on some wet, squishy marshland, right? I want the ground to be somewhat firm. So just kind of looking quickly around this spot, right here is jumping out at me. This is a really nice flat spot. I'll even sometimes get down like this and look for slopes. Now, another example is over here. Now here, we have another area, but I can tell this has a pretty decent slope to it, especially when I come down here. I can clearly see this is sloping down this way. So maybe this is something that I want to try to avoid. Next, we need to talk about avoiding drainages or areas where a lot of water is going to pool. So as you can see, if I came here on a hot sunny day where everything was dry and I just pitched my tent here and then it poured rain, obviously my tent's going to be flooded and that's not good. So when you arrive, you want to be thinking, okay, if it's going to pour rain, where is that water going to pool and where is that water going to drain? So you don't want to put your tent in an area that's kind of depressed, right? All that water is going to pool there. And then same with drainages. Where is that water going to run? You don't want to be pitching your tent in the way of those drainages. This is really important if you camp in the desert. That rocky desert landscape does not absorb water well, and there's a lot of flash flood potential in the desert. Those washes really do receive a lot of water. It can go from nothing to a lot very, very quickly. So you want to make sure that your tent and your campsite are not in those areas. When I arrive, again, before I'm pitching the tent, this is something that I'm looking at. I'm looking around at the mountains at a distance, at the hillside, and asking myself, where is that water going to go before the tent is pitched? Next, we're going to talk about the importance of not only looking down, but also looking up and at what's around you. You want to look for any standing dead trees that could potentially fall on your campsite and on your tent. These are sometimes called widowmakers, and you don't want to be sleeping peacefully in your tent and a tree falling on you. That's obviously no good. This is something that I think is often overlooked. When you arrive, you should assess everything around you, on the ground, above, looking at all of the trees that are within a distance to where if they fell, they would hit your campsite. This is really, really important. So here, not pitching a tent, I'm gonna walk around and I'm gonna look up and around me for any trees that are standing but dead. Another thing that I'm thinking about is protection from the weather. So high winds, thunderstorms that can roll in. Behind me, there is a beautiful meadow, but that's an example of somewhere that I would not want to be in a thunderstorm. I don't know about you, but I don't want to get struck by lightning. In general, I want to avoid big open meadows and mountain peaks and ridges and places that are more likely to get struck by lightning. And in this particular case, instead, I might choose to pitch my tent in a growth of small trees of uniform height. In general, you want to avoid the tallest tree in the forest because that is the most likely one to get struck by lightning. Just factoring in the weather and how you can use the area to kind of protect yourself from high winds and thunderstorms, and also avoid those areas that are high risk in thunderstorms. Next, you want to think about where you're pitching your tent relative to water. So the general guideline is you want to be at least 200 feet from water sources, so streams and rivers and lakes. But at the same time, if you're backpacking, for example, you're probably going to want to be within walking distance to the water, so relatively close to it so that you can gather new water throughout your trip. So thinking about maintaining a good distance, but also making sure that you have the resources available for your trip. So I've decided on my camp spot. Now, it might seem like this is a lot of stuff, but it really doesn't take that long to do. For this spot, I stopped, I looked around, I walked around, I looked on the ground. The ground is nice and firm and flat. I looked up. I don't see any standing dead trees or big branches that could fall on this campsite. It's actually up on a bit of a hill here. So as rain comes down, it's gonna go around this campsite and not pool here on my tent. So I've thought about all of these things. For me at this point, it's all pretty much automatic and it really doesn't take long to do. One other thing I want to talk about is thinking about the sun and shade exposure on your tent. Now, you really can't always account for this, and it's definitely not something that should be at the expense of the other things that we already talked about. So what I mean is, if I'm camping in the winter, in the colder months, I'm gonna want that sun to hit my tent first thing in the morning to start to warm things up. So I might position my tent or put it in a location where it's gonna get early morning sun. Now, on the opposite end of that, in the hot summer months, maybe I wanna try to keep my tent in the shade longer, especially in the morning. When the sun hits the tent, it heats up so quickly in the summer. So maybe I wanna account for that. Now, in a place like this, there are tons of trees. So pretty much throughout the day, as the sun is moving across the sky, there's gonna be periods of sun and shade on this tent. Again, I just wanna reiterate, this is not something that you should factor in if it's going to be at the expense of all of the other points that we've already talked about. So that is a rundown of the things that I'm thinking about and considering when I'm choosing where I want to pitch my tent. I have said this before, and I will say it again and again. All of this really can be boiled down to situational awareness. It is crucial. When you arrive at an area that you want to pitch your tent, stop, listen, get quiet, look at the ground, look above you, look around you, walk around the campsite. Really take in the landscape, listen to the trees, listen to the wind, and then use that information to make better, more informed decisions. taking a moment to assess the area before you actually set up your tent is a really, really good habit to get into. So I hope this was helpful. A lot of this stuff I have learned the hard way. So if you like this video, make sure to give it a like, and I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. So comment, chat with me, and share your experiences. Hit that subscribe button, and I will see you next week.